Frank Miles's fingers trembled. The words burned into his retinas like acid. "We have your wife. Don't call police. $500,000 in cash." Was this some kind of joke? The second he read the message, Frank called his wife Marla, straight to voicemail. He tried again, and again, instinctively, pointlessly, dead silence. What the hell was he supposed to do now? He was just about to call the police when his phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. No cops, no tricks. Canyon Road Bridge, mile marker 7, midnight. Leave the bag by the marked bush. Come alone or she's gone forever. Frank's jaw clenched. Marla, he whispered, staring at her photo on his desk. 15 years of marriage. Sure, they'd grown distant. Hell, they barely spoke anymore except about bills and schedules, but she was still his wife, still his responsibility. His corner office on the 32nd floor of the Embarcadero Tower overlooked San Francisco Bay, where fog rolled in like ghostly fingers. Frank specialized in crisis management for high-profile legal cases. He knew every dirty trick, every angle, every way people tried to destroy each other. But this was personal. Frank opened his laptop and began liquidating everything. Stocks, bonds, emergency accounts. By morning, he'd have the money. The canyon road twisted through towering redwoods like a serpent's spine. Frank's hands gripped the steering wheel as his headlights cut through the darkness. The old leather suitcase sat in his passenger seat, stuffed with $500,000 in cash. Mile marker 7. He pulled over and killed the engine. Marla's phone was still off. Silence pressed against him like a living thing. No other cars. No movement, just the distant sound of wind through branches. Frank stepped out, suitcase in hand. His breath formed clouds in the cold air. "I'm here," he called into the darkness. He left the suitcase by the marked bush. "Where is she?" Nothing. Frank walked back to the car. Then he waited and waited. Hours crawled by. His phone remained silent. No instructions, no contact. Damn it! Frank slammed his fist against the car hood. He stayed there until dawn, eyes burning from exhaustion. Finally, he stepped out and walked back to the drop spot, just to check. The suitcase was gone. Frank got home and locked the door behind him. His temples were pounding with blood. What now? Wait for another message? Call the cops, or risk making things worse. Then it hit him. The cameras. Their smart house recorded everything. Door entries, motion sensors, even air quality readings. If someone had taken Marla, there would be evidence. Maybe they'd show something. A clue. Someone taking Marla. But just then, he heard the sound of the front door opening. His heart hammered as footsteps echoed through their Tiburon home. "Frank?" Marla's voice, shaky and small. He rushed to the foyer and found her standing there, clothes torn, makeup smeared, eyes wide with what looked like genuine fear. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by rage. "Jesus Christ, Marla, are you okay? Where have you been?" "I escaped," her voice cracked. "I got away from them." Frank pulled her into his arms, feeling her trembling. "We need to call the police, FBI. These people need to pay for what they did to you." "No!" Marla pulled back sharply. "No police. Please, Frank, I just want to forget this happened. I can't deal with interrogations and questions and reliving it all." Something in her tone made him study her face. The fear looked real, but there was something else underneath. Something he couldn't quite identify. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, we don't have to do anything you're not ready for. Let's just focus on getting you cleaned up and feeling safe." She nodded gratefully and headed upstairs. Frank watched her go, his crisis consultant instinct screaming that nothing about this felt right. The next week passed in careful normalcy. Marla seemed to recover quickly. They had dinner together, watched movies, even made love once. It felt like they were rebuilding something. Then came the dinner at Chez Laurent, their favorite French restaurant overlooking the bay. "Frank," Marla said over dessert, her voice steady in a way that made his skin crawl. "I want a divorce." The fork slipped from his fingers and clattered against his plate. "What?" "I've been thinking about it. Even before what happened. I feel like a different person now. Like I need space to figure out who I really am." Her eyes were dry, determined. "This whole experience made me realize how short life is, how we shouldn't waste time pretending to be happy when we're not." Frank stared at her, his mind reeling. Marla, you just went through something traumatic. This isn't the time to make major life decisions. My mind is clear, Frank, clearer than it's been in years. She reached across the table and touched his hand. I don't want to hurt you any more than I already have. Frank forced his expression into one of devastation. Inside, though, something cold and calculating began to take shape. I need time to process this. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Frank had already made his decision. Something was rotten here, and he was going to find out exactly what. That night, while Marla showered, Frank accessed their home security system. He never ended up checking the footage from the day Marla vanished, because like magic, she came back, said she escaped. What he found made his blood turn to ice. 3 days before the supposed abduction, the logs showed Marla leaving through the back door at 2:07 a.m. and returning at 4:39 a.m. Her phone's GPS had been disabled, but the house sensors didn't lie. Frank scrolled through more data. This wasn't an isolated incident. Over the past 6 months, Marla had made dozens of late-night exits, always with her phone's location services turned off. He studied her when she emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in her terry cloth robe. There was something different about her jewelry, a delicate silver necklace he'd never seen before. New necklace? He asked casually. Marla's hand flew to her throat. Oh, this old thing? I've had it forever. But Frank's trained eye caught the faint store tag still attached to the clasp. She'd forgotten to remove it completely. It's beautiful, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The next morning, while Marla ran errands, Frank contacted his old friend David Chen, a private investigator who specialized in asset recovery. Within hours, David had traced the necklace to Aurora Designs, an upscale boutique in Marin County. Purchased 3 weeks ago, David reported. Cash transaction. But the clerk remembered the buyer. Attractive woman, mid-40s, came in with a tall guy with sandy hair. They were affectionate. Frank felt something dark and violent stir in his chest. Get me everything you can on recent transactions in that area. Hotels, restaurants, rental properties. I want to know who this guy is. The name surfaced within 48 hours. Bo Henley, 38, a restoration architect who specialized in rebuilding homes after wildfires. Divorced, no kids, and currently renting a cabin in Point Reyes under a 6-month lease. Frank studied the surveillance photos David had taken. Handsome in a rugged way, with the kind of confident smile that probably made women forget they were married. The rage building in Frank's chest felt like molten metal, but it was the background check that made everything click into place. Real name is Bradley Hendricks, David explained over the phone. Changed it legally in 2017 after serving 2 years for financial fraud in Arizona. Ran a fake investment scheme targeting divorced women. Got out, moved to California, got his architecture license under his new identity. Frank closed his eyes. Marla had no idea she was sleeping with a convicted con artist. Or maybe she did and didn't care. There's more, David continued. I tracked the IP addresses from those ransom emails you forwarded. They originated from a coffee shop in Carmel by the Sea, 2 blocks from Henley's current project site. The pieces were falling into place like dominoes. The $500,000 you were supposed to drop? I found wire transfer records. 3 separate transactions made the day after your supposed drop. 2 went to offshore accounts in the Caymans. 1 went to a shell company called Coastal Restoration LLC. Let me guess, Henley's company? Bingo. Your wife and her boyfriend tried to rob you, Frank. I'm afraid the abduction was complete fabrication. Frank hung up and sat in his office, staring out at the bay. The fog was rolling in again, thick and gray, just like the lies that had been clouding his marriage. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a legal pad. It was time to plan his revenge. I think couples counseling could help us work through this, Frank suggested over breakfast, his voice carefully modulated to sound hopeful rather than calculating. Marla looked surprised. I thought you'd accepted that we're getting divorced. I have, but we've been together 15 years, Marla. Don't we owe it to ourselves to at least try to end this amicably? Maybe understand where things went wrong? She considered this, probably thinking about how therapy sessions could help her paint him as an emotionally distant husband. Okay, if you think it would help, Doctor. Sarah Winters was exactly what Frank needed. A therapist who recorded all sessions for her notes and had testified in numerous divorce proceedings. More importantly, she was thorough and would ask the right questions. Tell me about the recent traumatic event, Dr. Winters said during their first session. How has that affected your relationship? Marla shifted uncomfortably. It's hard to talk about. I was taken, held against my will, but I managed to escape. That must have been terrifying. How long were you held? Time got blurry. I don't want to talk about it. Frank watched his wife lie with practiced ease, noting every detail. Who were your captors? Men? I I don't really remember much. I think I blocked it out. Dr. Winters made notes. Memory suppression is common in trauma cases. Frank, how did you handle the situation? They contacted me with a ransom demand, $500,000. I got the money together, but when I went to make the drop, no one showed up. Then Marla came home on her own. You didn't contact the authorities? Marla jumped in quickly. I begged him not to. I just wanted to put it behind us. The session continued for an hour, with Marla weaving an increasingly complex web of lies while Frank played the supportive, confused husband. Every word was being recorded. By the third session, Marla had grown comfortable enough to reveal more. I feel like I've been living a lie for years, she said, tears streaming down her face. Like I've been pretending to be someone I'm not. The abduction, as horrible as it was, it made me realize I can't keep pretending. I need to be honest about who I really am. And who is that? Dr. Winters asked gently. Someone who hasn't been happy in this marriage for a long time. Someone who's found connection with another person and doesn't know how to reconcile that with her commitments. There it was. Not quite a confession, but close enough. Frank reached over and took her hand. I appreciate your honesty, Marla. It hurts, but I understand. She squeezed his hand gratefully, having no idea that every word was being preserved for the legal battle to come. While maintaining the facade of a grieving husband trying to save his marriage, Frank methodically built his case. David Chen's investigation had uncovered a treasure trove of evidence. Bank records showing Marla had been slowly siphoning money from their joint accounts over 6 months. Credit card statements revealing romantic dinners and hotel stays during times she claimed to be visiting her sister. Cell phone records that placed her in Point Reyes on 12 separate occasions, always overnight, always when she'd told Frank she was somewhere else. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source. Marla's mother, Eleanor Reeves. Mrs. Reeves, David reported, has been having financial troubles. Lost her house in Stockton to foreclosure 6 months ago. Been living in a rental ever since. Guess who's been paying for it? Frank studied the bank statements. Monthly transfers of $2,500 from one of Beau's shell companies to Eleanor's account. Get me audio surveillance on the mother, Frank ordered. I want to know exactly how deep this conspiracy goes. The answer came within a week. David had planted listening devices in Eleanor's apartment during a maintenance visit arranged through a cooperative landlord. The conversation between mother and daughter was damning. He's getting suspicious, Mom. The therapy sessions are making me nervous. Stick to the plan, sweetheart. Once the divorce is final, you'll get half of Frank's assets, and we can all disappear to Costa Rica like we planned. What if he finds out about the fake abduction? He won't. You played the sufferer perfectly. And even if he suspects something, what can he prove? You escaped from hijackers. End of story. I just feel guilty lying to Dr. Winters. She seems so nice. Nice doesn't pay the bills, Marla. Your husband has millions. We deserve our share after everything we've been through. Frank listened to the recording 3 times, his rage crystallizing into something cold and sharp. This wasn't just infidelity or even fraud. This was a calculated conspiracy involving his wife, her lover, and her mother to destroy his life and steal his fortune. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. Frank spent 2 weeks planning every detail. He wanted to savor this moment, to see the exact second when Marla realized how completely she'd been outmaneuvered. He rented a beachfront house in Mendocino under a shell company name. Isolated, private, with no neighbors for miles, perfect for what he had in mind. I've rented a place up the coast, just for the weekend, he told Marla over dinner. Marla hesitated. I don't know if that's a good idea, Frank. We've already decided. Please, one last weekend as husband and wife. Give me that much. Her guilt made her agree. They drove up Highway 1 on a Friday evening, the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly to their left. Frank made pleasant conversation, pointing out landmarks, reminiscing about better times. Marla relaxed. probably thinking this would be easier than she'd expected. The house was stunning, perched on bluffs overlooking the ocean with floor-to-ceiling windows and a wraparound deck. Frank had stocked it with her favorite wine and ordered dinner from the best restaurant in town. "This is beautiful," Marla said, stepping onto the deck. "I'd forgotten how much I love it up here." "I thought you might. Remember our anniversary here 3 years ago?" She smiled wistfully. "That was a good weekend." They ate dinner by candlelight, the sound of waves crashing below them. Frank was the perfect host, attentive, charming, making sure her wine glass never emptied. By the time they moved to the living room, Marla was relaxed and slightly tipsy. "Frank," she said, curling up on the leather sofa, "I want you to know that even though I'm asking for a divorce, I don't regret our marriage. We had some wonderful years." "We did." Frank sat across from her, a manila folder in his hands. "In fact, I brought something to help us remember those years." He handed her the folder with a smile. Marla opened it curiously, then went very still. The color drained from her face as she stared at the first photograph, Bo Henley's mug shot from his Arizona arrest. "Frank, I can explain." "Keep looking," he said calmly. The next photo showed Marla and Bo entering the Point Reyes cabin together. Then another of them kissing in a restaurant. Then bank records showing the wire transfers. Then transcripts of her conversations with her mother. Marla's hands shook as she flipped through the page after page of evidence. When she reached the security log showing her late-night departures, she looked up at him with something approaching terror. "Frank, please, I just wanted to hear it from you," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "The whole truth, all of it." Marla set the folder aside and tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. I was lonely, and Bo made me feel—" "Bo Hendricks," Frank corrected. "That's his real name. Did you know he's a convicted fraud? That he's run this exact same scam on other women?" The look of genuine shock on her face told him she hadn't known, which made it even more delicious. "He's been playing you, Marla, using you to get to my money. And you brought your mother into it, turned this into a family business. Frank, I never meant for it to go this far." The abduction thing was Bo's idea. He said it would just be a way to get some quick cash and then we could disappear together. $500,000 is not quick cash, Frank snarled, his composure finally cracking. "That's grand theft. Fraud, conspiracy. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Marla began to cry. "Please, Frank, I'll call it off. We can go back to how things were." "No." Frank stood up, towering over her. "We can't. Because Monday morning you're going to be arrested, along with your boyfriend and your mother." "What?" "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? I've spent 20 years in crisis management, Marla. I know every dirty trick in the book." "And you three amateurs thought you could outplay me?" Marla tried to run, but Frank was faster. He caught her arm and spun her around. "You're not going anywhere until you hear exactly what's going to happen to you." What followed was the most brutal conversation of Frank's life. He detailed every piece of evidence, every lie she told, every law she'd broken. Marla alternated between denial, bargaining, and desperate attempts to seduce him back into compliance. "I love you, Frank. I always have. Bo was just a mistake." "Stop." Frank's voice could have cut glass. "Don't make this worse by lying to my face. I heard you planning your escape to Costa Rica. I know about the offshore accounts. I know your mother's been coaching you through this whole thing. She needed help. She lost her house. So you decided to steal mine?" The argument escalated until Marla was screaming at him, all pretense of remorse gone. "You want to know the truth?" she shrieked. "I hate this life. I hate this house. I hate your boring friends. I hate pretending to be the perfect corporate wife. Bo makes me feel alive in a way you never could." "Then you'll love prison," Frank said coldly. "Because that's where you're going to spend the next 10 to 15 years. Marla's face contorted with rage. She grabbed a wine bottle and swung it at his head. Frank ducked and tackled her to the ground. They struggled briefly before he pinned her arms. "Let me go. Not until you understand what you've cost yourself. The prenup you signed 15 years ago has an infidelity clause. You get nothing in the divorce. Nothing. Your boyfriend will go to prison for fraud and extortion. Your mother will lose her apartment and probably do time as an accessory." "You can't prove any of this." Frank laughed bitterly. "I've been planning this for weeks, Marla. While you thought you were so clever, I was building a case that will destroy all three of you. Frank released her and stepped back. Marla curled into a ball on the floor, sobbing. Frank, please. I'll do anything. I'll give back the money. The money's already gone. Bo spent it on his gambling debts and a down payment on a boat he planned to sail to Mexico. It was a lie, but Frank wanted her to understand exactly how thoroughly she'd been used. My whole life is ruined, she whispered. You made your choices, Frank said without sympathy. Now you get to live with the consequences. Monday morning brought a media circus. Frank watched from his office as news vans surrounded his house in Tiburon. The arrests had been coordinated perfectly. Marla at their home, Bo at a construction site in Sonoma, and Eleanor at her apartment in San Rafael. The charges were extensive: conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted extortion, money laundering, and filing false police reports. The FBI had seized all of Bo's assets, frozen the offshore accounts, and recovered most of the stolen money. Frank's phone rang constantly, reporters wanting statements, friends expressing shock and support, colleagues praising his thoroughness in exposing the conspiracy. He answered none of them. Instead, he sat in his office watching the news coverage with grim satisfaction. The story had everything the media loved: a sophisticated con game, a love triangle, family betrayal, and a spectacular downfall. The only call he took was from his attorney, Marcus Webb. The prosecution wants to meet, Marcus reported. They're offering Marla a plea deal, 5 years if she testifies against Henley and her mother. What did you tell them? That we'll consider it. But Frank, you need to prepare yourself for what's coming. This is going to be a very public trial. Your private life will be dissected in court and in the media. Let them look, Frank said. I have nothing to hide. That was a lie, but Marcus didn't need to know that. Over the next 6 months, Frank became the media's favorite sufferer. He played the role perfectly. The successful businessman betrayed by the woman he loved, the devoted husband who'd tried to save his marriage even after discovering his wife's infidelity. He gave carefully staged interviews, always appearing hurt, but dignified. He donated the recovered money to a foundation for abduction sufferers. He even started dating again, a classy radiologist named Catherine, who made him look sympathetic and moving on with his life. Behind the scenes, though, Frank was orchestrating every aspect of the prosecution's case. His evidence was so thorough that the defense had virtually no room to maneuver. Bo's attorney tried to claim his client had been manipulated by Marla and her mother, that he was just a lovesick fool who'd been drawn into their scheme. But the prosecution had records of 2 previous similar cons he'd run in Arizona and Nevada. Eleanor's lawyer attempted an insanity defense, claiming grief over her late husband's passing had driven her to irrational behavior. But the recorded conversations with Marla proved she'd been the mastermind behind the fake abduction scenario. Marla's defense was the most desperate. Her attorney, a slick criminal lawyer named Rodriguez, painted her as a misused wife driven to desperate measures by Frank's emotional neglect and controlling behavior. It was a strategy that might have worked if Frank hadn't recorded everything. The trial began on a rainy Tuesday in February. The San Francisco courthouse was packed with reporters, curiosity seekers, and legal professionals eager to watch a master class in evidence presentation. Frank sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit and an expression of quiet dignity. He'd lost 15 pounds and grown his hair slightly longer, giving him a vulnerable, wounded appearance that the cameras loved. Marla sat at the defense table in a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back severely. She looked older, smaller somehow. The months in jail awaiting trial had taken their toll. Prosecutor Janet Morrison was in her element. She laid out the case methodically, walking the jury through every lie, every forged document, every stolen dollar. Ladies and gentlemen, she said in her opening statement, this is not a case about a marriage gone wrong. This is not about infidelity or hurt feelings. This is about 3 people who conspired to commit a devastating financial crime against an innocent man. They planned it for months. They executed it with cold calculation. And when it was over, they planned to disappear with the sufferer's life savings while he mourned what he believed was his wife's traumatic abduction. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage, phone records, bank statements, audio recordings. Morrison presented it all with surgical precision, building a case so airtight that even the defense attorneys looked defeated. But the most damaging testimony came from Dr. Sarah Winters, the marriage counselor. Mrs. Miles presented herself as a trauma sufferer, Dr. Winters testified. She claimed memory loss, emotional fragmentation, all consistent with someone who had experienced a violent abduction. But as I reviewed our sessions in light of the evidence, I realized she was performing. Every response was calculated to generate sympathy while positioning herself for a favorable divorce settlement. Morrison played excerpts from the therapy sessions. The jury listened in fascination as Marla wove her web of lies, speaking of finding her true self and needing to break free from the constraints of her marriage. She's essentially confessing, Morrison told the jury. She's telling Dr. Winters that she's been living a lie, that she's found someone else, that she needs to be honest about who she really is. What she's really saying is that she's been planning this betrayal for months. Rodriguez's defense of Marla was doomed from the start, but he fought valiantly. He put character witnesses on the stand, friends who testified about Marla's kindness, her charity work, her devotion to her mother. He tried to paint Frank as a cold, controlling husband who had driven his wife to desperation. Frank Miles is a master manipulator, Rodriguez argued. He spent his entire career in crisis management, learning how to control narratives and destroy reputations. Is it any wonder that his wife felt trapped, suffocated, desperate enough to make terrible choices? But when Rodriguez tried to call Frank to the stand as a hostile witness, his strategy backfired spectacularly. Frank was unshakable. He answered every question with calm professionalism, acknowledging his marriage's problems while maintaining his innocence and victimhood. Did you love your wife, Mr. Miles? I did. Despite our problems, I loved her and wanted our marriage to work. Even after you discovered her affair, I was hurt and angry, but I was willing to try counseling. I believed in our vows. Isn't it true that you're a wealthy man who could afford to lose $500,000? Frank's expression hardened slightly. I worked for 20 years to build my career and my savings. The amount of money stolen doesn't make the crime less serious. But you got the money back, didn't you? Most of it. After months of FBI investigation and legal fees that have cost me nearly as much as was stolen in the first place, the cross-examination went on for 2 days, with Rodriguez trying desperately to find some crack in Frank's armor. He found none. Eleanor Reeves took the stand in her own defense, a frail woman in her 70s who seemed genuinely confused about how she'd ended up facing federal charges. I just wanted to help my daughter, she testified tearfully. I lost my house. I had nowhere to go. Marla said she'd found a way to make some money so we could start over somewhere warm. Did you know the abduction was fake? Her attorney asked. Not at first. Marla told me she was in trouble, that some bad people were threatening her. She said Frank had to pay them money or they'd hurt her. When did you learn the truth? Eleanor's voice broke. When Beau told me it was all pretend. That they were just borrowing the money and would pay it back after the divorce. It was a pitifully weak defense, made worse by the prosecution's recordings of Eleanor coaching Marla on her sufferer story. Morrison's cross-examination was brutal, but professional. Mrs. Reeves, you received $2,500 a month from Mr. Henley for 6 months before the fake abduction, correct? Yes, but I thought it was from Marla. You knew your daughter didn't have that kind of money. I didn't ask questions. I was grateful for the help. Did you ever wonder where a restoration architect working on small projects got the money to support both you and your daughter in the lifestyle she was living? Eleanor had no answer. The prosecution played the recorded conversation where Eleanor discussed getting Frank's money and moving to Costa Rica. The jury watched the elderly woman's face crumble as her own words condemned her. Beau Henley's trial strategy was the most aggressive. Throw everyone else under the bus and claim he was the sufferer of a seductive woman and her manipulative mother. I fell in love, he testified in his own defense. Marla told me her husband was abusive, that she was trapped in a loveless marriage. She said he controlled all the money and would destroy her if she tried to leave. His attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Vance, painted him as a romantic fool manipulated by criminal masterminds. My client is guilty of one thing, believing the woman he loved. When Marla Miles told him her husband had threatened to leave her penniless, when her mother begged him to help their family escape an abusive situation, he made the terrible decision to help them in the only way he could think of. It was a compelling narrative that might have worked if the prosecution hadn't had Beau's complete criminal history. Morrison destroyed him on cross-examination. Mr. Henley, you've used variations of this same scheme several times before, haven't you? I don't know what you mean. In 2014, you convinced Sandra Martinez of Phoenix that her ex-husband was stalking her and helped her stage threatening incidents to increase her alimony payments. That was different. In 2016, you convinced Rita Kowalski of Las Vegas that her business partner was embezzling from their company and helped her transfer funds to offshore accounts. You're twisting. And now you want this jury to believe that you just happened to fall in love with another unhappy wife who needed help stealing her husband's money? Morrison presented evidence of Beau's gambling debts, his failed businesses, his pattern of targeting vulnerable women with access to money. By the time she finished, he looked like exactly what he was, a career criminal who'd finally been caught. Marla took the stand on the final day of testimony. It was a desperate gambit. Her attorney knew she was likely to be convicted regardless, but hoped her emotional appeal might reduce her sentence. She wore a simple gray dress and spoke in a barely audible voice, playing the role of the reformed sinner seeking forgiveness. "I know what I did was wrong," she began. "I know I hurt Frank terribly, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." She painted herself as a lonely, depressed woman who'd been seduced by a master manipulator. Rodriguez walked her through her version of events: a gradual seduction by Beau, manipulation by her own mother, a slow descent into criminal behavior that she was too weak to resist. "I never wanted to hurt Frank," she concluded tearfully. "I just wanted to feel loved again." It was a masterful performance that might have swayed a jury if they hadn't already heard hours of recordings proving she'd been an active, willing participant in every aspect of the conspiracy. Morrison's cross-examination was swift and merciless. "Mrs. Miles, you testified that you were manipulated into this scheme. But you were the one who suggested using your husband's security system passwords to make the fake abduction look real, weren't you?" I don't remember. "You were the one who researched your husband's financial accounts to determine exactly how much he could afford to lose, weren't you?" Morrison played recording after recording of Marla actively planning, strategizing, and executing every aspect of the conspiracy. By the time she was finished, Marla's claims of manipulation looked absurd. The verdict. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman's voice was steady and clear. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant Marla Miles guilty. On the charge of attempted extortion, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of filing false police reports, we find the defendant guilty." Marla's shoulders shook as each verdict hit her like a physical blow. At the defense table, Rodriguez put a steadying hand on her arm, but his face showed he'd expected this outcome. The verdicts for Beau and Eleanor were identical, guilty on all counts. Judge Patricia Holbrook scheduled sentencing for the following month, remanding all 3 defendants to custody pending their hearings. As the bailiffs led Marla away in handcuffs, she turned toward Frank one last time. Her eyes were red with tears, but underneath the grief, he saw something else. A flash of pure hatred that told him she finally understood exactly how completely he'd destroyed her. Frank maintained his expression of somber satisfaction as cameras flashed around him, but inside he felt a cold pleasure that bordered on ecstasy. The sentencing hearing drew an even larger crowd than the trial. Sufferer impact statements were scheduled, and Frank had prepared carefully for his moment in the spotlight. Judge Holbrook called the court to order and addressed the defendants. "Before I impose sentence, I want to make clear that this court views conspiracy to defraud through staged crime as among the most serious, non-violent offenses possible. You have not only stolen money but violated the trust that holds our society together. When people can no longer trust that crimes reported to police are real, when they cannot trust that their spouses are honest about their safety and well-being, the very fabric of our community is damaged." She turned to Frank. "Mr. Miles, would you like to make a sufferer impact statement?" Frank rose slowly, his prepared speech memorized perfectly. He walked to the podium with the measured gait of a man still processing his trauma. "Your Honor, I want to thank this court for delivering justice today. For 15 years, I believed I was married to a woman I could trust with my life. I believed that when she was in danger, I would move heaven and earth to protect her. I believed that her mother, who I'd welcomed into our family, cared about our happiness." His voice carried just the right amount of pain and strength. The defendants didn't just steal my money. They stole my faith in love, in family, in the possibility that people can be honest with each other. I may never be able to trust another romantic partner completely. I may never be able to hear about an abduction on the news without wondering if it's real. They've changed who I am as a person, and I'll carry that damage for the rest of my life. Frank paused, appearing to collect himself. But I want them to know that they haven't broken me. I've found the strength to rebuild my life, to believe in goodness again. I hope that someday they can find genuine remorse for what they've done and use their time in prison to become better people. It was a masterpiece of false forgiveness and dignified strength. Several jurors were visibly moved, and Frank caught sight of newspaper reporters scribbling furiously. Judge Holbrook nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Mr. Miles. Your grace in the face of this betrayal is commendable." She turned to the defendants. "Bo Henley, please rise." Bo stood on shaking legs. His expensive suit couldn't hide how much weight he'd lost during the trial. "Mr. Henley, your criminal history shows a pattern of targeting vulnerable women for financial gain. You are a hunter who uses romantic manipulation to commit serious crimes. You corrupted a marriage, destroyed a family, and attempted to steal a life's worth of honest work. I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will make full restitution to Mr. Miles for all legal fees and damages." Bo's knees buckled. His attorney caught his arm as the bailiff moved to restrain him. "Eleanor Reeves, please rise." Eleanor stood with difficulty, her arthritis making every movement painful. "Mrs. Reeves, your age and your grief over your husband's passing provide some mitigation. However, the recordings make clear that you were not a passive sufferer, but an active participant in planning this conspiracy. You corrupted your own daughter and helped target a man who had never damaged your family. I sentence you to 6 years in federal prison, with a recommendation that you serve your time in a facility equipped to handle elderly inmates." Eleanor collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "Marla Miles, please rise." Frank watched his wife stand for the last time as a free woman. She'd lost at least 20 pounds during the trial, and her designer clothes hung loose on her frame. "Mrs. Miles, your betrayal is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this case. You weaponized your husband's love against him. You turned his willingness to sacrifice everything for your safety into a tool to rob him. You involved your elderly mother in serious federal crimes. You showed no remorse until you were caught, and even then, your testimony suggested you still don't fully understand the gravity of your actions." Judge Holbrook's voice grew stern. "Marriage is a sacred trust. When that trust is violated through criminal conspiracy, it damages not just the immediate sufferers, but society's faith in the institution of marriage itself. I sentence you to 10 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will make full restitution to Mr. Miles and forfeit any claim to marital assets under the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause." Marla's composure finally shattered. She screamed, a raw animal sound of pure despair that echoed through the courtroom. Frank, please! Don't let them do this to me! I still love you!" The bailiffs moved quickly to restrain her as she fought to reach him. Frank watched impassively as they dragged his wife away, her desperate pleas echoing off the courthouse walls. 6 months after the sentencing, Frank sat in his office reviewing financial statements. The restitution payments had recovered all his legal fees plus damages. The book deal for his story had brought in another $2 million. The movie rights were under negotiation with 3 major studios. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine, the radiologist he'd been dating. "Dinner tonight? I made reservations at that place you like." Frank smiled and typed back his acceptance. Catherine was perfect, intelligent, successful, financially independent. She had no idea how carefully he'd researched her background before asking her out. David Chen knocked on his office door. "You wanted to see me?" "Come in, David." "Close the door." Frank gestured to a chair across from his desk. David had been well compensated for his investigative work, but their business relationship was far from over. "I have another project for you," Frank said. "My ex-wife will be eligible for parole in 7 years. I want to make sure she never gets it." David raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" "Prison infractions, associations with the wrong people, maybe some pill possession. Nothing that would seriously hurt her, but enough to keep her classified as a problem inmate." That's a risky game, Frank. If anyone connects those incidents back to you, they won't. You're very good at your job, David. And I'm very good at mine. Frank opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. There's 50,000 in there. Consider it a retainer. David took the envelope without looking inside. What about the boyfriend and the mother? Bo Henley won't survive his first year. Men like him don't do well in federal prison, especially when word gets out that he's a con artist who targets women. As for Eleanor, Frank shrugged. She's 73 with diabetes and heart problems. Nature will take care of her. And if they talk, if they try to expose what really happened? Frank's smile was cold as winter fog. Who's going to believe them? 3 convicted felons claiming they were set up by their sufferer? The media loves me, David. I'm the grieving husband who overcame betrayal with dignity and strength. They're criminals who destroyed their own credibility. David nodded slowly. You've thought of everything. I always do. After David left, Frank walked to his window and looked out at the bay. The fog was rolling in again, thick and gray, swallowing the distant islands. He thought about Marla in her federal prison cell, probably awake at this hour, staring at the ceiling and wondering how her perfect plan had gone so wrong. He thought about Bo, trying to survive among men who would despise him for his crimes against women. He thought about Eleanor, an old woman dying slowly behind bars because she'd been greedy enough to conspire against him. Frank had told the court that they hadn't broken him, that he'd found the strength to rebuild his life. That was true, as far as it went. What he hadn't mentioned was how much he'd enjoyed breaking them in return. 2 years into Marla's sentence, Frank received an unexpected call from her prison counselor. Mr. Miles, this is Sandra Williams at FCI Dublin. Your ex-wife has requested to see you. I know this is unusual, but she's been a model prisoner, participating in therapy and educational programs. She says she has something important to tell you. I'll be there Saturday, he told Williams. FCI Dublin was a low-security federal prison for women, surrounded by rolling hills and looking more like a college campus than a correctional facility. Frank went through the security procedures with practiced patience, having visited other clients here over the years. Marla was waiting in the visitor's room, wearing standard prison khakis and looking older than her 45 years. Her hair had gone gray at the temples, and deep lines marked her face, but her eyes were clearer than Frank had seen them in years. Hello, Frank. Marla, you look... He searched for something kind to say. You look healthy. She almost smiled. Prison food and mandatory exercise? Who knew? They sat across from each other at a plastic table, speaking in low voices while guards watched from across the room. Why did you want to see me? Frank asked. Marla was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, about what you did. What I did? You set us up, Frank. All of us. You knew about the affair long before the fake abduction, didn't you? Frank kept his expression neutral. I don't know what you mean. The security logs you showed me, they went back months. You'd been tracking my movements, recording my calls, building a case against me while pretending to be the loving husband trying to save our marriage. You were having an affair and planning to rob me. I protected myself. You did more than that. Marla leaned forward. You manipulated us into committing worse crimes than we'd originally planned. The abduction scam was Bo's idea, but it was only supposed to be for 50,000. You liquidated $500,000 and made sure everyone knew about it. Frank's pulse quickened, but his voice remained steady. You're inventing conspiracy theories, Marla. The evidence spoke for itself. Did it? Or did you help create that evidence? Her eyes were sharp now, focused. I've been working in the law library here, Frank, learning about entrapment, about prosecutorial misconduct, about how smart men destroy their enemies. Even if what you're suggesting were true, and it's not, you still committed multiple felonies. You still betrayed our marriage and conspired to steal from me. I know. Marla's voice was quiet. I'm not claiming innocence, Frank. I did terrible things, and I deserve to be punished. But you went beyond justice. You orchestrated our destruction like it was a chess game. Frank stood to leave. I think this conversation is over. Bo is dead, Frank. The words stopped him cold. What? Stabbed in the shower 3 months ago. Officially, it was a dispute over gambling debts, but the timing was interesting. Right after he started talking about appealing his sentence, claiming he'd been entrapped. Frank sat back down slowly. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Because I think you planned it. Just like you planned my mother's heart attack. Your mother had a medical episode. These things happen to elderly people in stressful situations. She was healthy before prison, Frank. Stress doesn't explain how she got access to cocaine that triggered her cardiac event. Frank's blood turned to ice, but he kept his expression sorrowful. Marla, I think grief and isolation are making you paranoid. These conspiracy theories aren't theories. Frank's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Even if anyone believed your fantasies, there's no evidence of anything illegal. Bo was eliminated by other inmates for reasons that had nothing to do with me. Your mother died of natural causes brought on by the stress of her own criminal behavior. So you admit you orchestrated their elimination? I admit nothing. And this recording is inadmissible in any court proceeding. Marla smiled sadly. I'm not trying to get you arrested, Frank. I'm trying to understand the man I was married to for 15 years. I'm trying to figure out when you became someone capable of having people eliminated. I didn't become anything, Frank said quietly. You just never knew who I really was. They stared at each other across the plastic table, husband and wife seeing each other clearly for perhaps the first time. I loved you, Marla whispered. Despite everything, I did love you. No, you didn't. You loved my money and the lifestyle I provided. When you found someone who made you feel more alive, you didn't hesitate to destroy me to get what you wanted. And you didn't hesitate to destroy everyone in response. Frank stood again. This time the conversation really is over. As he walked toward the exit, Marla called after him. I'll get out someday, Frank. And when I do, I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. Frank paused at the security checkpoint and looked back at her. No, you won't. Because if you try to hurt me again, I'll finish what I started. The threat was delivered in the same calm, professional tone he used in business meetings. Somehow, that made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. The final move. Frank drove back to San Francisco in thoughtful silence. Marla's accusations were closer to the truth than he'd expected, but they were also unprovable. More importantly, they showed she still didn't understand the depth of his planning. Back in his office, he opened a secure laptop and accessed an encrypted folder labeled Insurance Policies. Inside were detailed files on every aspect of his revenge against the conspiracy that had tried to destroy him. Bo's file contained security footage of the man discussing his gambling debts with known criminals, financial records showing he'd borrowed money from dangerous people, and communications with a federal inmate who'd agreed to eliminate him in exchange for Frank's help with his own legal appeal. Eleanor's file showed her medical records, her prescriptions, and the carefully planned introduction of contraband pills into her system through a compromised guard who thought he was helping with a much smaller infraction. And Marla's file? That was the thickest of all. Frank opened it and reviewed the timeline he'd been following for 3 years. Every prison infraction had been carefully orchestrated, every negative report from guards he'd bought. Every random pill test that came back positive because of substances introduced to her food or personal items. The parole board would review her case in 4 years. By then, her record would show her to be a dangerous, unrepentant criminal who posed a continuing threat to society. She'd serve her full sentence, plus any additional time her infractions earned her. But Marla's threat to expose him when she got out suggested she might be more dangerous than he'd realized. Perhaps it was time to consider a more permanent solution. Frank made 2 phone calls. The first was to David Chen. I need you to research federal inmate transfers, he said without preamble. I want to know which facilities have the highest rates of inmate violence against women convicted of financial crimes. Frank, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, I'm thinking my ex-wife is becoming a liability. Handle it. The second call was to a contact he'd cultivated over years of crisis management work, a federal corrections official who owed Frank several favors. I need Marla Miles transferred to a higher security facility, Frank explained. Her current prison is too comfortable. She's not learning the seriousness of her crimes. That's unusual, Frank. She's been a model prisoner at Dublin. Check her record again in a week. I think you'll find some concerning developments. Frank ended the call and returned to his files. By the time he was finished planning, Marla would be transferred to a facility where her life expectancy could be measured in months, not years. He felt no guilt about what he was doing. Marla and her co-conspirators had tried to destroy him through deception and theft. They'd forced him to defend himself through superior planning and execution. If they couldn't survive the consequences of their own actions, that was natural selection at work. Frank closed the laptop and walked to his window. The fog was particularly thick tonight, reducing the city lights to dim halos in the gray murk. Perfect weather for making people disappear. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Missing you tonight. Can't wait for our weekend in Napa." Frank smiled and typed back his response. Catherine represented his future. A clean, honest relationship with a woman who would never betray him because she had too much to lose. Marla represented his past, a mistake he'd corrected with the same methodical precision he brought to all his professional challenges. By this time next year, that mistake would be permanently erased. Frank Miles stood on the deck of his new home in Carmel, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. The house was smaller than his Tiburon estate had been, but it suited his current life perfectly. Clean lines, modern amenities, and complete privacy. Catherine joined him on the deck, carrying 2 glasses of wine. She'd moved in 6 months ago, and they were discussing marriage. Her background check had been even more thorough than she knew, revealing a woman whose worst crime was a parking ticket from her residency years. "Beautiful evening," she said, settling beside him on the outdoor sofa. "Perfect," Frank agreed. His phone chimed with a news alert. Frank glanced at it absently, then felt his pulse quicken as he read the headline. "Federal prisoner dies in facility incident." The article was brief. Marla Miles, serving a 10-year sentence for conspiracy and fraud, had been found dead in her cell at FCI Coleman in Florida. Preliminary reports suggested cardiac arrest, possibly brought on by a previously undiagnosed heart condition exacerbated by the stress of recent disciplinary actions. Frank deleted the alert and slipped his phone back into his pocket. "Everything okay?" Catherine asked. "Just work," Frank said, taking a sip of wine. "Nothing that can't wait until Monday." As the sun disappeared below the horizon, Frank reflected on the past 5 years. He'd lost a marriage, gained a fortune, destroyed 3 lives, and rebuilt his own. The experience had taught him valuable lessons about trust, planning, and the importance of completely eliminating threats to his security. Most people would consider what he'd done monstrous. Frank preferred to think of it as thorough. His phone rang. David Chen. "I assume you saw the news?" David said without preamble. "I did. Natural causes?" "As natural as we could make them look. The heart medication we introduced to her system 6 months ago finally did its job." "Good. Any loose ends?" "None. The guard who helped us has been transferred to a facility in Alaska. The inmate who provided the medication died of an overdose last week. Unrelated to our business, just coincidence." "There are no coincidences, David. Only planning and execution." Frank ended the call and turned to Catherine, who was absorbed in a medical journal. "I love you," he said suddenly. She looked up, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "I love you too. Are you sure you're okay?" "Better than okay," Frank said, pulling her close. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." As they sat together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Frank allowed himself a moment of complete satisfaction. His enemies were dead, his reputation was intact, and his future was secure. The ransom had indeed been a lie. But the revenge, that had been absolutely real and absolutely perfect.